In this episode of The Russell Brown Show, I want to take you through a simple step-by-step process of creating 3D text here inside of Adobe Photoshop CC. And to do this, I'm going to work closely with Adobe Illustrator CC to create this effect, because I'm going to start with an Illustrator file. But let's go through this process. You can see here I've placed the Illustrator file into Photoshop. It has the standard 2D text here of this monster's name. Then I'm going to remove the text in Adobe Illustrator and then finally add in a 3D text effect as you see here. Okay, now my story begins, of course, over in Adobe Illustrator. Switching over to Illustrator, you can see here's my original illustration. What I'm going to do first is remove the text from the background illustration by turning off the visibility here in Adobe Illustrator CC. Then I'm going to extract that particular element and create a separate document of just that text, as you see here. And it's surrounded by transparency, as we'll see when we bring it into Adobe Photoshop. Let's switch back over to Photoshop right now and go to that project right here. So in this case, I've actually placed the Illustrator file that we created earlier. As you can see to the right, it's a smart object here on my screen. And of course, if I double click on this, it'll open it back up into Illustrator. This demonstrates the great way you can work between the two applications. Now in this project, I want to create some 3D text, and I want to take you through the step-by-step process of doing this, and let's make it simple and easy. So we have a document here displayed on transparency. I'm going to go up to my 3D menu here inside of Photoshop CC and down to New 3D Extrusion from Selected Layer. I just select that. It's going to use the transparency around this layer as the area to create an extrusion of this text. I select that. It's fairly straightforward. It's easy. It's simple. You could be done right now. But I want to take you through a few more features and demonstrate some easy ways to work with 3D objects here inside of Photoshop CC. To begin with, let's go through the basics. If you want to adjust the 3D object itself, you click on the 3D object. If you want to adjust the position of the camera's view of this object, you click outside the object, and you'll notice a yellow line appear on the outside. So let's go through that. I click on the object, and I can now control the object. In this case, I'm using the Move on Z-axis adjustment here by clicking and moving my mouse up and down. And if I move outside of the object and click, the yellow line appears, and I can now adjust the angle of my camera. If you learn anything about the basics of working with 3D, those are the two things you need to know. Select your object and move your object. Select outside the object and move the camera. And you'll start to understand the difference between the two. Okay, in this case, I want to do a slight rotation. I'm going to select the object as you see here. Then move to the edge of the object and notice that the icon changes over each surface that you pass over. So if I move to this position, I should be able to rotate it. Did you see the icon change? Now that shows you how easy this is. So if I want to rotate and adjust, I merely move to the location within the object, and the icon for moving that changes. So here in the middle, I go up and down. On the edge, I rotate. Let's get this looking just the way I want it, just like that. Now, the next thing I want to do is to click on the surface again to make sure I'm selecting the image. And over here to the right, under Properties, notice that I can set a shape preset. I'm going to go to this flyout menu right here, and I'm going to select one of these presets. Watch what happens to the surface of this 3D object. Cool. I can then click on these presets and it will adjust it and give it different qualities of a hard-edged corner or a rounded corner or even like a pillow, as you see here. some really interesting characteristics. I'm going to go with this one right here because it has that sharp-edged monster look to it. That looks great. Okay, now let's adjust the camera position so that when we apply this onto our poster, it looks like the shadow we're going to create will be cast right onto that image. So I'm going to go right back over here, and I'm going to click on this icon at the top, right here, my coordinates. I like to set my coordinates so I can exactly position this where I want it. And check this out, if I change the X coordinates here at the top to 90 degrees, did you see how it flips it? And it's making it perfectly parallel to my background ground plane. And when you're working in 3D, that ground plane is all important because that's where the shadow is being cast. Okay, now we switch that to 90 degrees. We know if we go back in and we work on our image, if we click outside, we get the yellow border. Let's now move the camera around. Cool. Till we can see the text just like this. Position the text the way we like it. Just there. Now we're ready for the lights. It's simple and easy. Right down here at the base, you can click on this infinite light source, which is automatically applied to any 3D object that you create in this fashion. I'm clicking on my light source right down here. I can then move to this point right here, this little control arm. I'm going to click and hold on the control arm and check this out. I can move the angle of the light. I can have very dramatic low angle light, above, below, and from different angles. But in this case, I want to cast a nice shadow pointing right down onto the surface of my poster. And that's why I moved my camera to look down on this so that the shadow casts onto the ground plane. And we remember that the ground plane is represented by this grid in the background. This looks great. This is a really nice, simple, basic introduction to text. We've extruded the text. We added a detail to the surface of the text, and we moved the shadow. Great. Let's now go over to my selection tool here, just like this, which will then turn off all my 3D controls. Because now I simply want to move this right over to my poster. So my poster is all ready for me right here. This is the version that does not have the 2D text in it. All I do now is go back to my 3D text, hold down my Command key on the Macintosh or my Control key on the PC, and the Move tool appears. I'm going to simply drag this up to the tabbed menu item here at the top for my monster, then drag it back down in, and now my text is in position. If I continue to hold the Command key or the Control key, I can then maneuver the text around. Now, to finish this all off, let's do one more thing. When I'm creating 3D text here in a poster like this, there's a really nice capability built into Photoshop that will make your text look better. And I'm going to close with this one final tip and technique. Under your 3D menu, I always like to go down and render the 3D object. Your 3D may look good in its current state, but if you render it, it will then process the details within this 3D object and add a really nice quality of realism to the 3D object. It's going to make sure that the shadows are really nicely rendered, as well as each facet and shape of the 3D object. When it's all done, I might actually turn this into a smart object, and then I'll position it within my document. Let's go ahead and do that. It has not finished the entire rendering, as you see here at the base. But if I select the Escape key, it will stop the rendering at that particular point. Then I can go over to my Layers tabbed panel, target the layer, and in this case, let's turn that into a smart object. That's going to freeze everything inside that shape So I can now go in and transform it with Command T on the Macintosh or Control T on the PC. I can now scale this down, holding down my Option and Shift key or my Alt and Shift key. Moving away from the center, rotating a bit, and positioning this exactly where I want it. That looks super. Let's then hit the Enter key, and we've created some really cool 3D text. Continue this process, and you too could even add additional 3D items to your poster so it ended up looking something like this. Fantastic. Give this technique a try when you want to create dynamic 3D effects here inside of Photoshop. Give it a try.